Studente dobro požadovat v ekonomika Rosji. Hopefully what I said, and by the way, I apologize to all Russian-speaking students and their parents. Hopefully what I said was, welcome to the economy of Russia. Let's take a look. So Russia has the 12th largest economy. Now this is very important because a lot of middle school students, this surprises a lot of middle school students because they think, oh, Russia has the largest territory. They have the largest geography. They're number one in geography, so they must be number one in everything else. Well, no. Size of your country does not mean, the size of your country where you rank in terms of geography does not mean that that's where you're going to rank in every other category. So they may be number one in terms of geography, but they have the 12th largest economy. Economies like Germany, Japan. Okay, remember we talked about Japan being third, the United States being first, the United Kingdom being fifth. They have larger economies than Russia. And if we were actually to go down the list, we'd think India has a larger economy than Russia. So Russia has the 12th largest economy. Their GDP, now I'm about to say this, it's only $1.64 trillion. That's still a lot of money that they're bringing into the country. But again, it's not as much as Germany. Remember, Germany was $4.2 trillion. So keep that in mind. Again, just because Russia's the largest country does not mean that they're going to be first in every other category. So their GDP is $1.64 trillion. And by the way, what does GDP mean? I'm going to keep on saying this till you remember this, until you can say it in your sleep. GDP, gross domestic product. It is the money that comes into a country in 1 year based on the trade that's happening because of all the businesses in that country. How much money comes into the country in 1 year? GDP, $1.64 trillion. By the way, I'm giving you the basic kind of definition of GDP. GDP is a little bit more complicated if we were actually figuring out how that number comes. So I'm giving you the basic to think about, okay? GDP per capita. Now remember, you're also going to be able to say this in your sleep. Per capita is a Latin term, but what does it mean? Per person. And when we say GDP per capita is per person, we take $1.64 trillion, divide it by the number of people in the country, and that gets us our average. What does the average person in Russia make? Now the answer is $29,267. Now if you think about it, that is way lower than the GDP per capita of Germany or the United Kingdom. So again, what's our rule? Large country in size does not equal being first in every category. So GDP per capita, $29,267. Now, by the way, this picture, I'm not going to tell you what's going on in this picture yet, but this is going to be a big clue to us to help us understand where does Russia get most of its $1.64 trillion. Right? The economy is mixed, socialist, leaning to command. All right, now you remember when we talked about Germany and the United Kingdom, when people talk about mixed, when we said, oh, okay, there's still market because the citizens are free to own their own business, but there's a lot of government regulation. When we get into Russia, the government actually owns a lot of the large corporations, a lot of the large companies, a lot of the large businesses. So we're dealing with mixed in terms of, man, the government owns a lot of the large companies. And of course, if it's mixed, you know that it's not going to be that far. If you're dealing with the government owning some large companies, you're moving further and further left, getting towards just socialism/communism. Right? So we'd say that their economy is mixed. We said put socialist in parentheses because we know if the government's owning some large companies, they're going to start owning more and more. And remember, who's the leader of Russia? Vladimir Putin. And so he is not one who's known for allowing freedom. So the government controlling people, controlling companies, controlling elections, that kind of all goes hand in hand. All right? So just as a recap, because I know I threw a lot out at you. Remember, the economy, we put it down on any test as mixed, but we know that this is different from Germany and the United Kingdom, where we say, oh, there's a lot of government regulation, but the citizens own their business. No, we're starting to deal with socialism here, where the government is owning businesses, okay, in Russia. So keep that in mind. Oil is the lifeblood. I don't know if you can see it there. The angle is kind of weird with the light. Oil is the lifeblood of Russia. Remember that picture that you saw before? Those are actually used to drill into the ground to get petroleum, to pump petroleum out of the ground. By the way, side note, oil, when petroleum is in the ground, we call it petroleum. When petroleum is out of the ground, we call it oil. So if you hear me say oil or petroleum, it's dealing with the same thing. Petroleum is just in the ground. Oil is once it's taken out of the ground. So oil is the lifeblood of Russia. Right? Agriculture. Agriculture is 4.7% of their gross domestic product. Now remember the other countries, it was less than 1%. It's 4.7% of their gross domestic product. Industry is 32.4% of their GDP. So remember we talked about manufacturing, different companies that might do things like mining, oil, and then services are 62.3% of their GDP. Again, notice how services and industry still make up the majority of GDP, but agriculture is almost 5% of their GDP. So, one might want to think about, I wonder why that is. Right? Just think about that for a second. By the way, this is a picture of an oil pipeline. Have you ever thought about it? The easiest way to transport oil is to have a pipeline. You're going to be able to transport more of it faster than if you have to keep unloading them on tankers and then send the tankers down roads. If you can build a pipeline, you can transport a lot more oil a lot faster. All right, by the way, this is something for you to think about. This is a map of all the oil pipelines going through Europe. And one of the things I want you to think about, we won't get too deep into this, but I want you to think about this. Most of Europe, when it comes to oil, they're dependent on Russia. Most of the oil that Europe gets comes from Russia. And so you can see all these different pipelines, and most of those pipelines start in Russia. Right? And there's one pipeline that they were trying to build under the North Sea to go to Germany. It just got stopped. The U.S. was involved in stopping that politically. Not like they did it with their army or anything, but politically. But the huge issue is, if most of Europe is dependent on oil from Russia, and Russia is run by Vladimir Putin, well, is that a good thing? Is that a good thing to be dependent on the thing that gives you gasoline to fly your planes and your cars if it's controlled by a dictator in Russia? So think about that. We'll get back to that in a second. Right? Russia is a single product economy. So here's the flip side. So you have European countries who are dependent on Russia, but Russia is a single product economy. They specialize in one thing, and that is oil. That's why I said oil is the lifeblood of Russia. Without oil, Russia would be a third world country today. Oil is where they make most of their money. So remember, many countries in Europe are dependent on Russia for oil. So European countries are playing a dangerous game because they're dependent for their gasoline from Russia. Russia is also playing a dangerous game because they only have one product that they make money off of. That makes the majority, that makes the majority of their GDP. Right? So, question for you. You already answered that question in the United Kingdom United Kingdom PowerPoint. So now here's the second question. So I want you to go back into what you submitted, go down one space, and I want you to answer this question. Why is it dangerous for countries in Europe to be dependent on Vladimir Putin and Russia for oil? Why is that a dangerous thing to have to get oil from Vladimir Putin and Russia? That's it. Why is it a dangerous thing for European countries to have to get their oil from Vladimir Putin and Russia? Answer that question. Go back into what you submitted for the United Kingdom. Just drop down a line. Type that up. Same thing. Please make sure that things are spelled correctly, that it actually makes sense. Reread what you wrote, and then submit. Okay? Take care, guys.